What happens when two small children have enough power to make grown adults flee in terror? When unlimited wealth meets unlimited chaos? When a billionaire's empire can't buy him the one thing he desperately needs, peace in his own home? Marcus Wellington had conquered Wall Street, dominated international markets, and built a tech empire worth $12 billion. But he was utterly defeated by two 7-year-old twins who had turned his mansion into a battlefield. 17 babysitters had quit. 3 nannies had threatened to sue. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Even the most experienced childcare professionals ran screaming from his Beverly Hills estate after encountering Emma and Ethan Wellington. But on a gray Tuesday morning, when hope seemed lost and Marcus was contemplating boarding school for his children, an unexpected woman walked through his doors. Rosa Martinez wasn't there to coddle or negotiate with the twins. She had her own unconventional methods that would shock everyone in the house. This isn't just a story about misbehaving children. It's about what happens when someone finally fights fire with fire, when boundaries are drawn in the most unexpected ways, and how sometimes the people who challenge us the most are the ones who change our lives forever. The Wellington mansion stood like a fortress against the Los Angeles skyline, its modern glass and steel architecture gleaming in the California sun. 47 rooms spread across 12 acres of perfectly manicured grounds, complete with tennis courts, swimming pools, and a helicopter landing pad. It was a monument to success, power, and the kind of wealth that most people could only dream of. Inside this palace of luxury, however, chaos reigned supreme. The sounds echoing through the marble hallways weren't the gentle hum of efficient household staff or the peaceful quiet of domestic bliss. Instead, the air was filled with crashes, screams, and the frantic footsteps of another childcare professional fleeing for their life. Marcus Wellington stood in his study, a vast room lined with first-edition books and dominated by floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city where he'd built his empire. At 42, he was the picture of corporate success. His dark hair was expertly styled, his charcoal suit tailored to perfection, and his steel-gray eyes held the sharp intelligence that had made him one of the youngest billionaires in America. Wellington Tech had revolutionized cloud computing and artificial intelligence, making him a household name in Silicon Valley and beyond. But right now, as he listened to the sound of something expensive shattering in the distance followed by the slam of the front door, Marcus felt like the biggest failure on earth. He didn't need to look out the window to know that another babysitter was speed-walking to her car, probably already composing her resignation text message. His phone buzzed on the mahogany desk. The caller ID showed Pinnacle Childcare Services, the most exclusive nanny agency in Los Angeles, the 5th one he'd tried this year. Marcus answered on the first ring. "Let me guess, Miranda quit." The voice on the other end belonged to Helen Crawford, the agency's director, a woman whose British accent usually conveyed authority and confidence. Today, she sounded exhausted. "Mr. Wellington, I'm afraid Miranda has decided not to return. She mentioned something about bite marks and having her hair pulled so hard she thought she might go bald." Marcus closed his eyes and pinched the bridge of his nose. What did they do this time? According to Miranda, Emma locked her in the pantry for 2 hours while Ethan replaced all her personal belongings with identical items covered in honey. When she finally escaped, they had somehow managed to fill her shoes with yogurt and her purse with sand from your Zen garden. The description should have been amusing. 7-year-olds pulling elaborate pranks might seem harmless, even clever. But Marcus knew better. This wasn't childish mischief. This was psychological warfare waged by 2 brilliant, angry children who had turned chaos into an art form. "Helen, I'll pay double your usual rate. Triple if necessary." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. "Mr. Wellington, I've been in this business for 23 years. I've dealt with children of celebrities, politicians, and royalty. But your twins." She trailed off, choosing her words carefully. "Perhaps it's time to consider alternative arrangements. Boarding school, perhaps? Or a more structured environment." The suggestion hit Marcus like a physical blow. Send his children away? The thought had crossed his mind more times than he cared to admit, especially during the darkest moments of the past year. But every time he considered it, he saw Victoria's face. His late wife would have been horrified at the idea of shipping their children off to some distant institution. "I'll find someone else," he said firmly. "There has to be someone out there who can handle them. Mr. Wellington, we've exhausted our entire roster. Every qualified professional in Los Angeles knows about the Wellington twins. Word travels fast in our industry." After hanging up, Marcus sank into his leather chair and stared at the framed photograph on his desk. Victoria smiled back at him, her arms wrapped around two giggling toddlers with gap-toothed grins and mischievous eyes. The picture had been taken just 3 years ago, but it felt like a lifetime. Back then, Emma and Ethan had been normal children. Energetic, certainly, and perhaps a bit more clever than average, but normal nonetheless. Everything had changed when Victoria died in a car accident 2 years ago. The twins had been in the car but survived with minor injuries. Marcus often wondered if their behavior was their way of processing grief, of acting out the pain they couldn't articulate. He'd taken them to child psychologists, trauma specialists, and behavioral therapists. Each professional had offered theories and treatment plans, but none had been able to reach Emma and Ethan through the fortress of anger and chaos they'd built around themselves. The sound of approaching footsteps interrupted his brooding. Mrs. Chen, his long-suffering housekeeper, appeared in the doorway. She was a small, efficient woman in her 50s who had worked for the family since before the twins were born. She was also the only member of his household staff who hadn't quit, though Marcus suspected it was only because she felt sorry for him. "Mr. Wellington," she said in her precise English, tinged with a slight accent from her native Taiwan. "The children are in the playroom. I've given them lunch and they seem—" She paused, searching for the right word, contained for the moment. Marcus stood up, straightening his tie. "I should go talk to them. Try to explain why Miranda left." Mrs. Chen's expression was sympathetic but doubtful. "Sir, with respect, they know exactly why she left. They planned it that way. She was right, of course. The twins weren't acting out randomly. Every prank, every bit of chaos, every carefully orchestrated disaster was designed to drive away the adults Marcus brought into their home. They were protecting themselves the only way they knew how, by ensuring that no one could get close enough to hurt them again." The playroom was on the mansion's second floor, a space that had once been Victoria's art studio. She'd been a painter, a talented one, and the room still held traces of her presence in the way the afternoon light streamed through the tall windows. Now it was filled with every toy and game money could buy, a wonderland that most children would die for. But luxury couldn't fill the empty spaces in two small hearts. Marcus found Emma and Ethan sitting at a small table, sharing what appeared to be a normal lunch of sandwiches and apple slices. They looked angelic in the soft light, their dark hair clean and neatly combed, their clothes unstained despite the morning's activities. Emma wore a pale blue dress with matching ribbons in her hair, while Ethan sported a crisp white polo shirt and navy shorts. They could have been models for a children's clothing catalog. The illusion of innocence shattered the moment they looked up at him. Emma's green eyes, so much like Victoria's, held a calculating intelligence that was unsettling in someone so young. Ethan's expression was more openly defiant, his jaw set in a stubborn line that Marcus recognized from his own mirror. "Hi, Daddy," Emma said sweetly, her voice the picture of childhood innocence. "Did Miranda leave already?" "You know she did," Marcus replied, pulling up a child-sized chair that looked ridiculous beneath his 6-foot frame. "Emma, we talked about this. The people who come to take care of you are here to help." "We don't need help," Ethan said flatly, taking a deliberate bite of his sandwich. "We take care of ourselves. You're 7 years old. You can't take care of yourselves." Emma tilted her head, studying him with those two knowing eyes. "Why not? You take care of yourself. You're never here anyway." The words stung because they held a grain of truth. Since Victoria's death, Marcus had thrown himself into work with an intensity that bordered on obsession. Wellington Tech was expanding into new markets, acquiring smaller companies, developing revolutionary technologies. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. His schedule was packed with meetings, conference calls, and business trips. He told himself it was necessary, that he was building an empire for his children's future. But the reality was simpler and more painful. Work was easier than grief, and the office was easier than home. "I'm here now," he said, hating how defensive he sounded. "For how long?" Ethan asked. "Until your phone rings? Until someone needs you for something more important than us?" Before Marcus could answer, his phone did indeed buzz with an incoming message. He ignored it, but the damage was done. The twins exchanged a look that spoke volumes. "The new babysitter will be different," Marcus said, though he had no idea where he'd find this mythical person. "I promise." Emma laughed, a sound that should have been delightful but somehow managed to be chilling. "They're all the same, Daddy. They all leave. Because you make them leave. Because they don't belong here," Ethan said with finality. "This is our house. Our family. They're strangers." Marcus wanted to argue, to explain that the people he hired cared about their well-being, that he was trying to provide them with stability and attention. But looking at his children's faces, he realized they didn't see caregivers or helpers. They saw invaders, threats to the fragile world they'd constructed in the wake of their mother's death. He stayed with them for another hour, playing a board game that Emma cheated at shamelessly while Ethan provided commentary on every move. For brief moments, they almost seemed like normal children. Emma giggled when she successfully cheated her way to victory. Ethan high-fived his sister with genuine glee. Marcus caught glimpses of the loving, mischievous children they'd been before tragedy changed everything. But then his phone rang. It was his chief technology officer calling about a crisis with their latest software launch. Marcus looked at the twins apologetically. "I have to take this. It'll just be a minute." The warmth drained from their faces instantly. Emma began putting away the game pieces with mechanical precision. Ethan turned his attention to a handheld gaming device, shutting his father out completely. By the time Marcus finished his call, they'd erected their emotional walls again, transforming back into the unreachable children who'd driven away 17 babysitters. That evening, after the twins had gone to bed without incident, they saved their energy for tormenting caregivers. Marcus found himself in Victoria's old office. He rarely came here anymore. The space was exactly as she'd left it, her art supplies still arranged on her desk, half-finished canvases stacked against the walls. Mrs. Chen dusted regularly, but otherwise the room remained a shrine to his wife's memory. He sat in Victoria's chair and opened her computer, something he hadn't done since shortly after her death. Her email was full of correspondence with other parents, teachers, and local business owners. Victoria had been deeply involved in the community, organizing charity events and volunteering at the children's school. She'd had a gift for connecting with people, for seeing past surfaces to the heart of things. Marcus scrolled through her messages, hoping to find some insight, some clue about how to reach his children. Most of the emails were routine, but one folder caught his attention. It was labeled Household and contained correspondence with various service providers and staff members. As he read through the messages, he began to understand something about his wife that he'd never fully appreciated. Victoria hadn't just hired people to work in their home. She'd built relationships with them. The messages revealed genuine care and concern for their employees' lives. She'd helped Mrs. Chen's daughter with college applications. She'd given the gardener time off to care for his sick mother. She'd written recommendation letters, provided references, and even attended a few weddings and birthday parties. One email thread particularly caught his attention. It was a conversation with a woman named Rosa Martinez about a housekeeping position. The exchange had taken place about 6 months before Victoria's death, but for some reason, Rosa had never been hired. The emails revealed an interesting picture of a woman who was direct, honest, and completely unimpressed by wealth or status. Victoria had written, "Rosa, I appreciate your candor about your previous employment. The fact that you left your last position because you disagreed with how the children were being raised shows strong character. Rosa's response was equally straightforward. Mrs. Wellington, I don't work for people who think money can replace parenting. Children need boundaries, consistency, and someone who isn't afraid to tell them no. If you're looking for someone to enable bad behavior because you can afford it, I'm not your person. The conversation had continued for several more exchanges, with Victoria clearly impressed by Rosa's backbone. The hiring process had stalled when Victoria became busy with a charity gala, and then the accident happened. Marcus stared at the screen, an idea forming in his mind. Rosa Martinez had impressed his wife, a woman with excellent judgment about people. More importantly, she hadn't been seeking the job for the money or the prestige of working for a wealthy family. She'd been looking for a position where she could make a real difference. He did a quick internet search and found a Rosa Martinez working for a cleaning company in East Los Angeles. The photo showed a woman in her early 30s with kind but determined eyes and a no-nonsense expression. According to her LinkedIn profile, she had experience in childcare as well as housekeeping, and several glowing recommendations that mentioned her work with challenging children. Marcus reached for his phone, then hesitated. It was nearly 10 o'clock at night, hardly appropriate for a business call. But desperation made him less concerned with proper etiquette. He dialed the number listed on the cleaning company's website. A woman answered on the third ring, her voice alert despite the late hour. Martinez Cleaning Services, this is Rosa. Ms. Martinez, my name is Marcus Wellington. I know it's late, but I found your correspondence with my wife Victoria in her files. She passed away 2 years ago, but I'm calling about a position in our home. There was a pause, then Rosa's voice, softer now but still guarded. I remember Mrs. Wellington. I'm sorry for your loss. What kind of position? I have 7-year-old twins who need supervision. They've been through 17 babysitters in the past year. I'll be honest with you, they're difficult children. They've been acting out since their mother died, and no one seems able to handle them. Difficult how? Rosa asked, and Marcus appreciated that she didn't immediately offer false reassurances or claim that all children were angels deep down. They bite, he said bluntly. They've locked caregivers in closets, put insects in their beds, and once convinced a nanny that the house was haunted by playing recordings of crying sounds in the walls. They're brilliant, creative, and completely out of control. Rosa was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, Mr. Wellington, why do you think your children are acting this way? The question caught him off guard. Most people assumed the twins were spoiled, that their behavior was the result of too much money and too little discipline. Rosa was asking about motivation, about the underlying causes. They're angry, he said slowly. They lost their mother, and they don't trust anyone not to leave them again. So they drive people away before they can get attached. And what have you done about it? Another unexpected question. I've taken them to therapists, child psychologists, behavioral specialists. I've tried reward systems, consequences, explaining their feelings. Nothing works. I'm not asking about your children, Mr. Wellington. I'm asking about you. What have you done about your own grief, your own anger? Marcus found himself speechless. In 2 minutes of conversation, this woman had cut straight to the heart of something he'd been avoiding for 2 years. His children weren't the only ones who had built walls after Victoria's death. He'd simply built his out of work and distance instead of pranks and chaos. I don't think that's relevant to the job, he said stiffly. It's completely relevant, Rosa replied without hesitation. Children mirror the adults around them. If you haven't dealt with your grief, how can you expect them to deal with theirs? Marcus felt a flare of irritation. He was offering this woman a job that would pay more than she probably made in 6 months, and she was lecturing him about his personal life. Are you interested in the position or not? He asked coldly. That depends, Rosa said. Are you interested in actually helping your children, or do you just want someone to contain them so you don't have to deal with the mess? The words hit him like a slap. He opened his mouth to deliver a cutting response, then stopped. Victoria would have liked this woman's directness. His wife had never been afraid to challenge him, to push back when she thought he was wrong. It was one of the things he'd loved most about her. "I want to help them," he said quietly. "I just don't know how." "Then we can talk," Rosa said. "But I have conditions. I don't work nights or weekends unless it's an emergency. I don't do anything that enables bad behavior, even if you disagree with my methods. And if you hire me, you commit to being present. Not physically present when convenient, but emotionally present. Your children don't need another employee, Mr. Wellington. They need their father." Marcus found himself agreeing to terms he'd never accepted from any other employee. They arranged to meet the following morning, and as he hung up the phone, he wondered what he'd gotten himself into. Rosa Martinez was clearly not going to be just another babysitter. She was going to be a force of nature, a woman who wouldn't be intimidated by wealth or cowed by difficult children. As he prepared for bed, Marcus felt something he hadn't experienced in months: hope. Maybe, just maybe, he'd found someone who could reach his children. Someone who could help them all heal. He had no idea that Rosa Martinez was about to turn their entire world upside down in ways he could never imagine. The woman who would walk through his doors tomorrow wasn't just planning to supervise Emma and Ethan. She was planning to revolutionize everything they thought they knew about boundaries, consequences, and what it really meant to care for someone. The battle for the Wellington family's future was about to begin, and it would be unlike anything any of them had ever experienced. Rosa Martinez arrived at the Wellington estate at exactly 8 o'clock the next morning, driving a well-maintained but clearly older Honda Civic that looked distinctly out of place among the luxury vehicles typically seen on the circular driveway. She parked next to Marcus's Bentley without any apparent self-consciousness, gathered a simple black messenger bag from the passenger seat, and walked toward the imposing front entrance with the confidence of someone who belonged there. Mrs. Chen answered the door, her expression curious but cautious. She had witnessed the parade of defeated caregivers over the past year and had developed a protective skepticism toward anyone new who claimed they could handle the Wellington twins. Rosa's appearance was understated but purposeful: dark jeans, a simple white blouse, and comfortable walking shoes that suggested someone prepared for actual work rather than supervision from a distance. "You must be Rosa," Mrs. Chen said, stepping aside to allow her entry. "Mr. Wellington is waiting for you in his study. The children are having breakfast in the morning room." Rosa nodded, taking in the marble foyer with its soaring ceiling and crystal chandelier. Her expression remained neutral, showing neither awe nor judgment at the opulent surroundings. "Thank you. Before I meet with Mr. Wellington, would it be possible to observe the children without them knowing I'm here?" The request surprised Mrs. Chen, but she recognized its wisdom. "Certainly. This way." They moved through the mansion's corridors, Mrs. Chen pointing out various rooms and explaining the household routines in hushed tones. The morning room was adjacent to the kitchen, separated by elegant French doors that provided a perfect vantage point for discreet observation. Through the glass, Rosa could see Emma and Ethan Wellington having what appeared to be a civilized breakfast. Emma sat primly in her chair, cutting her pancakes into precise geometric shapes before eating them in a specific pattern. Her movements were deliberate and controlled, suggesting a child who had learned to impose order on her environment through rigid personal rituals. Ethan, meanwhile, was building an elaborate structure out of his breakfast items, using bacon as support beams and fruit as decorative elements. His construction was methodical and impressive, displaying the kind of spatial intelligence that would serve him well in engineering or architecture. To most observers, the scene would have appeared charming: two well-behaved children enjoying a nutritious meal in a beautiful setting. But Rosa saw something else entirely. She noticed the way Emma's eyes constantly scanned the room, cataloging exits and potential hiding spots. She observed how Ethan's hands never stopped moving, even while eating, as if stillness made him vulnerable. Most telling was the complete absence of conversation between the siblings. They were aware of each other, occasionally sharing meaningful glances, but their communication was nonverbal and coded. "They're planning something," Rosa said quietly to Mrs. Chen. "Do you know what happened to their last caregiver?" Mrs. Chen's expression darkened. Miranda lasted 3 days. On the final morning, she came down to find her car decorated with what appeared to be finger paint. It turned out to be something much less pleasant that the children had somehow acquired from the neighbor's dog. She drove away crying and never returned. Rosa watched the twins for another minute, noting the subtle ways they were coordinating their activities. Emma's careful arrangement of her food wasn't about order, it was about timing. Ethan's construction wasn't random play, it was strategic preparation. Whatever they had planned for their new caregiver was already in motion. They're intelligent, Rosa observed. Much more so than most adults give them credit for. Too intelligent for their own good, Mrs. Chen replied with a mixture of affection and exasperation. Before their mother died, they used their cleverness for delightful mischief. Emma once convinced the mailman that we were hosting a circus by teaching the neighbor's cat to walk on its hind legs and positioning it on the front porch. Ethan created an elaborate treasure map that led his grandfather on a hunt through the entire property, ending at a genuine treasure chest filled with homemade cookies. The wistful tone in Mrs. Chen's voice revealed how much the household mourned not just Victoria's death, but the transformation of two creative, loving children into strategic adversaries. Rosa filed this information away, understanding that beneath the twins' defensive behaviors lay the capacity for joy and connection. A soft chime indicated that Marcus Wellington was ready for their meeting. Rosa followed Mrs. Chen through the mansion's corridors, taking note of family photographs that lined the walls. The progression told a story in images. Early photos showed Marcus and Victoria as a young couple, radiating happiness and possibility. Wedding pictures captured a moment of pure joy, followed by images of pregnancy, birth, and early parenthood. The most recent photos, however, showed a subtle but unmistakable change. Victoria's smile, while still beautiful, carried a hint of fragility. Marcus appeared increasingly distant, even when physically present with his family. The study where Marcus waited was a testament to professional achievement. Awards and recognitions covered one wall, while another displayed the covers of magazines featuring Marcus as Businessman of the Year, Innovator of the Decade, and Technology Visionary. His desk held multiple computer monitors showing real-time stock prices, global market indicators, and the sprawling network of his business empire. Marcus stood as Rosa entered, extending his hand in a gesture that was polite but reserved. His appearance was impeccable as always, but Rosa noticed the subtle signs of a man under tremendous stress. His handshake was firm but brief, his smile didn't reach his eyes, and despite his expensive grooming, there were shadows beneath his eyes that spoke of sleepless nights. "Ms. Martinez, thank you for coming. I trust Mrs. Chen has shown you around." "She has, and I've observed your children during their breakfast. Before we discuss terms and responsibilities, I need to understand something about your expectations." Marcus gestured to a leather chair across from his desk, but Rosa remained standing. The subtle power play wasn't lost on either of them. She wasn't positioning herself as a supplicant seeking employment, but as a professional evaluating whether this family was worthy of her time and expertise. "What would you like to know?" Marcus asked, settling behind his desk in a clear attempt to establish his authority. "Your previous caregivers, were they hired to manage your children's behavior, or to understand it?" The question clearly caught Marcus off guard. He had expected discussions about salary, duties, and schedules, not a philosophical examination of his parenting approach. "I'm not sure I understand the distinction." Rosa moved to the window, looking out at the expansive grounds where gardeners were already at work despite the early hour. "Management is about control. Understanding is about connection. Your children have driven away 17 caregivers, which tells me they're not responding to management. They need someone who's willing to understand why they behave the way they do and address those underlying needs." Marcus found himself studying this woman with growing curiosity. She spoke with the confidence of someone who had earned her insights through experience rather than education. There was no deference in her manner, no attempt to impress him with credentials or flattery. "The psychologists I've consulted say they're acting out because of trauma and grief. They recommend patience, consistency, and professional intervention." "And how has that approach worked?" Rosa asked, turning to face him with a direct gaze that demanded honesty. Marcus felt heat rise in his cheeks. Obviously not well, or you wouldn't be here. Professional intervention has its place, but your children don't need another expert trying to analyze their behavior. They need someone who's willing to meet them where they are and show them that relationships don't have to end in abandonment. The words stung because they highlighted a truth Marcus had been avoiding. Every caregiver who had fled represented another abandonment in Emma and Ethan's young lives, reinforcing their belief that adults couldn't be trusted to stay. "What exactly are you proposing?" he asked. Rosa finally took the offered seat, but perched on the edge as if ready to leave at any moment. "Your children bite because they've learned that aggression creates distance, and distance feels safer than vulnerability. They lock people in closets because they want to control when people leave instead of being surprised by abandonment. Every prank, every act of chaos, is their way of testing whether the adults in their lives will stay when things get difficult." Marcus leaned back in his chair, struck by the clarity of her analysis. "And your solution?" "I don't run from children who are testing boundaries. I set boundaries that are worth testing." Before Marcus could ask what she meant by that cryptic statement, a blood-curdling scream echoed through the mansion. It was followed by running footsteps, slamming doors, and what sounded like furniture being overturned. Mrs. Chen's voice could be heard calling out in alarm, though her words were indistinct. Marcus jumped to his feet, his face pale with a mixture of embarrassment and resignation. "I should go see what they've done now." Rosa stood as well, but her expression remained calm. "No. Let me handle this. You don't understand, when they get like this, they're completely out of control. The last time this happened, Miranda ended up locked in the bathroom for 6 hours while they dismantled her luggage and scattered the contents throughout the house. Mr. Wellington, you hired me to deal with your children. Let me do my job." There was something in her tone that commanded respect, not arrogance, but absolute certainty. Marcus found himself nodding, though every instinct told him to intervene before Rosa Martinez became the 18th caregiver to flee his home. They walked quickly toward the source of the commotion, which seemed to be centered in the main living area. As they approached, the sounds of chaos grew louder: objects hitting walls, furniture scraping across floors, and the distinctive sound of two children working together to create maximum destruction. Mrs. Chen met them in the hallway, her usually composed demeanor shattered. "I'm so sorry, Mr. Wellington." One moment they were finishing breakfast peacefully, and the next they were running through the house like wild animals. "I think they've barricaded themselves in the living room." Rosa nodded calmly, as if this was exactly what she had expected. "Do you have a first aid kit readily available?" The question made Marcus's stomach drop. "First aid? Are they hurt?" "Not yet," Rosa said matter-of-factly. "But they might be soon." Children who are determined to test boundaries often push until they encounter real consequences. Marcus wanted to ask what she meant, but Rosa was already walking toward the living room doors. The sounds from within had evolved from random destruction to what seemed like strategic fortification. The twins were clearly preparing for siege warfare. Rosa knocked firmly on the closed doors. The sounds within immediately stopped, replaced by the kind of absolute silence that any parent knows is far more ominous than noise. "Emma and Ethan," she called out in a clear, authoritative voice. "My name is Rosa Martinez. I'm here to spend time with you today." A pause, then Emma's voice, sweet and innocent. "We don't want to spend time with you. We want you to go away." "I understand that," Rosa replied calmly. "Unfortunately, going away isn't an option for me right now. So we need to figure out how we're going to coexist for the next few hours." More silence, then the sound of whispered consultation between the twins. Marcus found himself holding his breath, waiting for Rosa's first defeat at the hands of his impossible children. "If you come in here," Ethan's voice carried a clear threat, "you'll be sorry." Rosa's response surprised everyone within earshot. "I appreciate the warning. I'll keep that in mind." Without waiting for further negotiation, she turned the door handle. Marcus stepped forward to stop her, but she held up a hand that froze him in place. The living room had been transformed into a battlefield. Furniture had been overturned to create barriers, cushions and pillows formed strategic bunkers, and the twins had apparently raided multiple rooms to create an arsenal of household items that could serve as projectiles. Emma crouched behind the overturned coffee table, her hair disheveled and her dress torn at one sleeve. Ethan had positioned himself near the windows, armed with what appeared to be a collection of decorative objects from the mantelpiece. Both children were breathing heavily, their faces flushed with adrenaline and defiance. They looked like small warriors preparing for their final battle, beautiful and fierce and utterly determined to drive away another adult who threatened their carefully constructed emotional fortress. Rosa surveyed the scene with the same calm assessment she might give to any other workplace situation. She noted the exits they had blocked, the weapons they had chosen, and the way they had positioned themselves to maximize their tactical advantage. Then she did something that no previous caregiver had ever done. She smiled. "This is impressive," she said, stepping carefully around a scattered pile of books. "You two clearly have excellent strategic planning skills." The twins exchanged confused glances. They had expected anger, fear, or attempts at negotiation. Admiration wasn't in their playbook. Emma recovered first, her voice sharp with suspicion. "We're not playing games. We want you to leave." "I'm sure you do," Rosa agreed, settling cross-legged on the floor in the center of the destroyed room. "But I'm not leaving, and you can't make me. So instead of wasting energy on impossible goals, let's figure out what's actually going to happen next." Ethan hefted a crystal paperweight, testing its weight. "We'll throw things at you until you run away crying. It always works." Rosa nodded thoughtfully. "That's certainly one approach. Let me share what will happen if you decide to throw that paperweight. First, you'll probably hit me, because your aim is quite good. It will hurt, and I'll probably bleed." The twins were clearly not expecting this matter-of-fact analysis of their intended violence. "Second," Rosa continued, "you'll discover that hurting someone doesn't actually make them disappear. I'll still be here, except now I'll be hurt and bleeding, which means we'll have to deal with medical attention and explanations to your father." Emma's grip on her own improvised weapon, a heavy book, began to loosen slightly. "Third, and most importantly, you'll learn something about me that you might not want to know." "What?" Ethan demanded, though his threatening posture had shifted slightly. Rosa's smile never wavered, but something in her eyes hardened. "You'll learn that I don't just take punishment, I give it back. If you hurt me, I will hurt you back. Not because I'm cruel, but because that's how the real world works. Actions have consequences, and I'm the consequence." The living room fell silent except for the sound of Marcus's sharp intake of breath from the doorway. No childcare professional had ever spoken to the twins this way, with complete honesty about the reality of their choices and their potential outcomes. Emma lowered the book completely, staring at Rosa with fascination rather than anger. "You would hurt us?" "Only if you hurt me first," Rosa said simply. "I'm not here to hurt anyone. I'm not here to be your friend, either. I'm here to spend time with you, and what that time looks like depends entirely on the choices you make right now." Ethan still held the paperweight, but his arm had dropped to his side. "Nobody ever said they would hurt us back. Because nobody ever told you the truth about how the world actually works," Rosa replied. "Most adults think children are too fragile to handle reality. I think children are smart enough to understand that every choice has a consequence, and strong enough to make better choices when they understand what those consequences might be." Marcus watched from the doorway as his children grappled with this completely foreign concept. They had spent months wielding their pain and anger as weapons, secure in the knowledge that adults would absorb their attacks without retaliation. The idea that someone might respond in kind was clearly revolutionary. Emma took a tentative step forward, drawn by curiosity despite her instinctive wariness. "What kind of hurt?" Rosa considered the question seriously. "If you threw that book at me and it left a bruise, I might step on your foot hard enough to leave a bruise. If you locked me in a closet for 2 hours, I might lock you in your room for 2 hours. Equal response, not escalation." "That's not fair," Ethan protested, though his outrage seemed half-hearted. "Fair would be me treating you the way you've been treating other people," Rosa said mildly. "Would you like me to lock you in a closet right now, throw things at you, and call you names? Because that's what fair would actually look like. The twins exchanged another glance, and Marcus could see them processing this uncomfortable truth. They had been dealing out treatment that they would never accept receiving, protected by the assumption that adults wouldn't fight back. So what do you want us to do? Emma asked, her defiance wavering for the first time. Rosa gestured around the destroyed room. I want you to make a choice. You can continue this path, throw your weapons, try to hurt me, and discover what it feels like when someone responds to aggression with aggression. Or you can help me clean up this mess, and we can find something more interesting to do with our time. What if we don't want to do either? Ethan challenged. Then we'll sit here in this destroyed room staring at each other until you get bored enough to choose one of the two options, Rosa said with perfect equanimity. I have nowhere else to be. The standoff lasted for nearly 10 minutes. Rosa remained seated on the floor, completely relaxed, occasionally examining her fingernails or adjusting her position. The twins maintained their defensive postures, but Marcus could see their resolve weakening as the adult in the room refused to engage in their power struggle. Finally, Emma made a decision that surprised everyone, including her brother. She walked over to Rosa and sat down facing her, close enough that their knees almost touched. I want to ask you something, she said. Rosa nodded, giving Emma her complete attention. Are you going to leave when we get too difficult? The question struck Marcus like a physical blow. This was the heart of everything, not defiance or cruelty, but the terrified question of a 7-year-old who had lost her mother and couldn't bear to lose anyone else. Rosa's response was immediate and uncompromising, yes. Emma's face crumpled, and Ethan dropped the paperweight with a crash that seemed to echo through the entire house. But not because you're difficult, Rosa continued quickly. I'll leave if you hurt me badly enough that I need medical attention. I'll leave if you damage property that's expensive to replace. I'll leave if your father decides he doesn't want me here anymore. But I won't leave because you're sad, or angry, or testing my boundaries. Those aren't reasons to abandon someone, they're reasons to stay and help them work through their problems. Emma's tears spilled over, but she didn't look away from Rosa's face. Promise? I promise that I will tell you the truth about my intentions, and I will never lie to you about whether I'm planning to leave. If circumstances change and I need to go, I will explain why and help you understand that it's not because you weren't worth staying for. This level of emotional honesty was unprecedented in the twins' experience with caregivers. Even their father, despite his love for them, had never addressed their abandonment fears so directly. Ethan approached slowly, sinking down beside his sister. What if we're really, really bad? Rosa smiled, the first genuinely warm expression the children had seen from her. Then I'll be really, really firm about boundaries and consequences. But being bad doesn't make someone unlovable, Ethan. It just makes them someone who needs help learning better ways to get their needs met. For the first time in months, Marcus saw his children's defensive walls begin to crack. Emma leaned slightly toward Rosa, drawn by the promise of unconditional acceptance. Ethan's hostile posture melted into something that resembled hope. Rosa stood and surveyed the destroyed room again. Now, we have a choice to make together. We can clean this up and find something fun to do, or we can leave it like this and find something fun to do. But either way, we're going to spend the day together, and I'd rather spend it enjoying your company than managing the aftermath of a temper tantrum. Emma giggled, actually giggled, for the first time in Marcus's presence in nearly a year. You're weird. I get that a lot, Rosa said solemnly. Weird can be good, though. Normal adults haven't been able to handle you too. Maybe weird will work better. As Marcus watched his children begin to help Rosa restore order to the living room, he felt something shift in his chest. It wasn't the dramatic transformation he had hoped for. Emma and Ethan were still guarded, still testing boundaries, still carrying the weight of their grief and anger. But for the first time since Victoria's death, they seemed willing to engage with an adult who saw them as complex individuals rather than problems to be solved. Rosa Martinez had done something in 30 minutes that an army of professionals had failed to accomplish in 2 years. She had acknowledged his children's pain without trying to fix it, accepted their anger without absorbing it, and offered them relationship without requiring them to earn it through good behavior. As the three of them worked together to right overturned furniture and gather scattered objects, Marcus found himself thinking that maybe, just maybe, he had finally found someone who could help his family heal. He had no idea that the real test was yet to come, and that Rosa's unconventional methods would soon attract the attention of someone determined to destroy the fragile progress they were making. The morning's success was just the beginning of a much larger battle, one that would challenge everything the Wellington family thought they knew about love, loyalty, and what it really meant to fight for the people who mattered most. 3 weeks had passed since Rosa Martinez first walked through the doors of the Wellington estate, and the transformation was undeniable. The mansion that had once echoed with the sounds of chaos and fleeing caregivers now resonated with something Marcus had almost forgotten existed, the laughter of his children. Not the bitter, calculating laughter that preceded their elaborate pranks, but genuine joy that bubbled up from deep within them. Emma and Ethan had settled into a routine with Rosa that was unlike anything they had experienced before. She arrived each morning at precisely 8 o'clock, greeted them with the same matter-of-fact warmth, and immediately engaged them in activities that challenged their intelligence while teaching them skills they had never realized they were missing. Under her guidance, they learned to cook simple meals, understanding that food was something to be appreciated rather than weaponized. They discovered gardening, finding peace in nurturing living things rather than destroying them. Most remarkably, they began to express their creativity through constructive channels rather than elaborate revenge schemes. The change in the household dynamic was profound. Mrs. Chen no longer approached the twins' vicinity with the wariness of someone entering a battlefield. The other household staff, who had grown accustomed to working around the destruction and chaos, found themselves able to perform their duties without constantly looking over their shoulders. Even the family's golden retriever, Bailey, who had learned to hide whenever the children appeared, now sought out their company, sensing the shift in their emotional energy. Marcus found himself drawn home earlier each day, eager to witness the small miracles that Rosa seemed to facilitate effortlessly. He would arrive to find Emma teaching Bailey to sit and stay with the patience of a professional trainer, or discover Ethan explaining complex mathematical concepts he had learned that afternoon while building architectural marvels out of household items. The children who had once seemed unreachable were not only accessible but genuinely delightful to be around. Perhaps most importantly, Rosa had begun to address the underlying grief that had been driving the twins' destructive behavior. She didn't approach their loss with the clinical detachment of the therapists Marcus had hired, nor did she try to rush them through the stages of mourning with artificial timelines and predetermined outcomes. Instead, she simply acknowledged their pain as real and valid while helping them understand that loving their mother's memory didn't require punishing everyone who tried to care for them. The evening ritual she had established was particularly powerful. Each night before bedtime, Rosa would sit with Emma and Ethan in what had once been Victoria's art studio. Instead of avoiding the space as Marcus had done, she had gently reintroduced the children to their mother's creative sanctuary. They would spend 30 minutes looking through Victoria's paintings, sharing memories, and talking about how much they missed her. Rosa never tried to minimize their sadness or rush them toward acceptance. She simply held space for their grief while helping them understand that missing someone was a way of loving them. Marcus had begun joining these sessions, initially as an observer but gradually as a participant. For the first time since Victoria's death, he found himself able to speak about his wife without being overwhelmed by guilt and regret. Rosa's presence somehow made it safe to remember the good times, the laughter, the dreams they had shared for their family's future. However, not everyone in the Wellington family's orbit was pleased with these positive developments. Dr. Patricia Hawthorne, the children's psychiatrist, had been growing increasingly concerned about what she viewed as Rosa's unprofessional approach to child psychology. During their monthly consultation, she expressed her reservations to Marcus with barely concealed disdain. "Mr. Wellington, I must advise you that Ms. Martinez's methods are completely contrary to established therapeutic practices. Her confrontational approach with the children could be causing psychological damage that won't become apparent until later." Dr. Hawthorne was a woman in her early 60s who had built her reputation on treating the children of wealthy families. Her approach was methodical, research-based, and focused on behavioral modification through carefully controlled interventions. Rosa's intuitive, relationship-based methods struck her as dangerously amateurish. "The children seem happier than they've been in years," Marcus replied, though he could hear the defensive tone in his own voice. "Temporary behavioral improvement doesn't indicate genuine healing," Dr. Hawthorne warned. "Children often respond positively to adults who fail to maintain appropriate boundaries. The fact that she threatened to hurt them in return if they hurt her is deeply concerning from a professional standpoint." Marcus found himself caught between competing philosophies. Dr. Hawthorne represented everything he understood about proper childcare: credentials, methodology, clinical expertise. Rosa represented something more mysterious but undeniably effective: intuition, authenticity, and results that spoke for themselves. "What are you suggesting?" he asked. "I think Ms. Martinez should be supervised by a licensed professional or replaced entirely. I have colleagues who specialize in trauma recovery for children who would be much more appropriate for Emma and Ethan's needs." The conversation planted seeds of doubt that Marcus found difficult to ignore. Despite the obvious improvements in his children's behavior and emotional state, he couldn't shake the nagging worry that he might be failing them by relying on someone without formal training in child psychology. His uncertainty was further complicated by a phone call from his sister-in-law, Diana Wellington, who had been conspicuously absent from their lives since the twins' behavior had spiraled out of control. Diana was Marcus's younger sister, a successful attorney who had always disapproved of what she saw as his overly permissive parenting style. She had largely avoided the family drama of the past 2 years, claiming that her busy legal practice left little time for personal visits. "Marcus, I've been hearing interesting things about your new nanny," Diana said without preamble during their phone conversation. "Word is getting around our social circle about some woman who's been unconventional in her approach to the children." Marcus felt his jaw tighten. The Wellington family's reputation had been a constant source of anxiety since the twins' behavior had become public knowledge among Beverly Hills society. Playdates had been canceled, birthday party invitations had stopped arriving, and Marcus was acutely aware that other parents viewed his children as dangerous influences on their own well-behaved offspring. "Her name is Rosa Martinez, and she's been incredibly helpful with Emma and Ethan." "I'm sure she has," Diana replied with a tone that suggested she was sure of nothing of the sort. "But Marcus, you have to think about the long-term implications here. This woman has no credentials, no formal training, and from what I understand, she's been making threats to hurt the children. How do you think that's going to look if it comes out publicly?" The conversation continued for another 20 minutes, with Diana systematically dismantling Marcus's confidence in Rosa's methods. She raised questions about liability, professional standards, and the potential for scandal if Rosa's unconventional approach became known in their social and business circles. By the time Marcus hung up the phone, his earlier certainty about Rosa's positive influence had been significantly shaken. That evening, Marcus found himself observing Rosa's interaction with the twins with new eyes. She was helping them prepare dinner, a weekly tradition they had established that involved the children planning a menu, shopping for ingredients, and cooking a complete meal for the family. Emma was carefully measuring ingredients while Ethan managed multiple cooking timers with the precision of a professional chef. Rosa moved between them, offering guidance and encouragement while maintaining the kind of relaxed authority that seemed to come naturally to her. "Dad, you have to try this sauce that Ethan made," Emma called out excitedly. "He figured out how to make it creamy without using any dairy because Mrs. Chen is lactose intolerant." The thoughtfulness behind the gesture struck Marcus powerfully. His children, who had spent months focused on causing discomfort to the adults in their lives, were now actively considering others' needs and finding ways to accommodate them. This level of empathy and consideration was exactly what the child psychologists had said would take years to develop. Yet Dr. Hawthorne's warnings echoed in his mind. Was this real progress, or were the twins simply responding to an adult who failed to maintain appropriate boundaries? Was Rosa's success masking deeper psychological issues that would manifest later? His internal conflict deepened when he received an unexpected visit from someone he had hoped never to see again, Miranda Castellanos, the babysitter who had lasted 3 days before fleeing in tears. She appeared at his office downtown, accompanied by a man she introduced as her attorney. "Mr. Wellington, I need to discuss the psychological trauma I experienced while working in your home," Miranda said, her voice shaking with what appeared to be genuine distress. "My therapist says I developed symptoms of PTSD from the treatment I received from your children." Marcus felt the blood drain from his face. "Miranda, I apologize for what happened, but I'm not sure what you expect me to do about it now." The attorney, a sharp-faced man in an expensive suit, leaned forward. "My client is considering legal action for the emotional distress she experienced. However, we understand that you've since hired someone who has been making threats to physically harm the children. We're concerned that this escalation in aggressive tactics suggests an acknowledgement that the children's behavior was indeed traumatic and dangerous." The implication was clear. Rosa's direct approach to boundary setting was being twisted into evidence that Marcus had known his children were dangerous but had failed to protect previous caregivers from harm. The attorney was building a case that painted Rosa's honesty about consequences as an admission of the twins' violent tendencies. "I think there's been a misunderstanding," Marcus began, but the attorney cut him off. "Mr. Wellington, we're not here to cause trouble. We simply want to ensure that appropriate measures are being taken to protect anyone who works with your children in the future. Perhaps we could arrange a conversation with your current caregiver to understand her methods better." The request sent alarm bells ringing in Marcus's mind. The last thing he needed was Miranda's attorney cross-examining Rosa about her unconventional approach to child care. He could imagine how Rosa's direct, no-nonsense explanations would sound when filtered through the lens of potential litigation. After Miranda and her attorney left, Marcus sat alone in his office trying to process the growing pressure he felt from multiple directions. Dr. Hawthorne wanted him to replace Rosa with someone who had proper credentials. Diana was concerned about social and professional reputation. Now he was facing the possibility of legal complications stemming from Rosa's honest but potentially misunderstood methods. Meanwhile, at home, Rosa was completely unaware of the storm brewing around her. She was focused entirely on helping Emma and Ethan continue their emotional healing while building the kind of secure relationships they had been missing since their mother's death. The children's trust in her had grown stronger each day, and she could see them beginning to believe that adults could be reliable, consistent, and genuinely caring. That evening's art therapy session was particularly meaningful. Emma had been working on a painting of their family, and for the first time, she had included a figure that represented Rosa. The addition was a prominent or central. Rosa appeared as a smaller figure standing slightly apart from the core family group. But her inclusion at all represented a monumental shift in Emma's understanding of their household dynamics. "Rosa's in the painting because she's part of our family now," Emma explained to her father with the matter-of-fact certainty that only children possess. "Not like Mommy was part of our family, but like someone who belongs here with us." Ethan nodded seriously. "She's the first grown-up who didn't lie to us about staying. Everyone else said they wouldn't leave, but Rosa said she might leave for specific reasons, and then she didn't do any of those reasons, so she's still here." The children's logic was both heartbreaking and profound. They had learned to trust Rosa precisely because she had been honest about the conditions under which she might leave, rather than making promises she couldn't guarantee to keep. Her transparency had become the foundation for the first secure relationship they had experienced since their mother's death. As Marcus listened to his children's explanations, he felt his resolve strengthen. Whatever concerns the professionals and family members might have, the evidence of Rosa's positive impact was undeniable. Emma and Ethan were thriving in ways that all the credentialed experts had failed to achieve. However, his renewed confidence was tested the very next day when Dr. Hawthorne arrived unannounced for what she called a wellness check on the children. She had apparently been in contact with Child Protective Services, expressing concerns about Rosa's methods and the lack of proper supervision in the household. The social worker who accompanied Dr. Hawthorne was a tired-looking woman named Janet Morrison who had clearly seen too much genuine abuse and neglect to be easily impressed by wealthy families' drama. She interviewed Marcus, Rosa, and the children separately, trying to determine whether the household environment was appropriate for the twins' well-being. Rosa's interview with the social worker was particularly crucial. Janet Morrison asked direct questions about Rosa's approach to discipline, her methods for managing the children's behavioral issues, and her understanding of appropriate boundaries between caregivers and children. Ms. Martinez, Dr. Hawthorne has expressed concern that you told the children you would hurt them if they hurt you. Can you explain that conversation? Rosa met the social worker's gaze steadily. I told Emma and Ethan that if they chose to hurt me physically, I would respond with equivalent physical consequences. I was establishing boundaries and helping them understand that their actions affect other people in real ways. That sounds like a threat of retaliation against children. No ma'am, it was education about natural consequences. These children had learned that they could hurt others without experiencing any negative results for themselves. They needed to understand that relationships involve mutual respect and that causing harm to others will result in harm to themselves. Janet Morrison made notes, her expression carefully neutral. How do you handle situations when the children misbehave? Rosa described her approach in detail, the clear communication of expectations, the logical consequences that directly related to the children's choices, and the emphasis on helping them understand how their behavior affected others. She explained how she addressed their underlying grief and abandonment fears while maintaining firm boundaries about acceptable behavior. The social worker's questions continued for another 30 minutes, covering everything from Rosa's background and experience to her understanding of child development principles. Throughout the interview, Rosa remained calm and articulate, explaining her methods without defensiveness while acknowledging that her approach might seem unconventional to professionals trained in more traditional techniques. When Janet Morrison interviewed Emma and Ethan, their responses provided the most compelling evidence of Rosa's positive influence. The children spoke about feeling safe with Rosa, understanding what was expected of them, and knowing that she would keep her promises. Most importantly, they expressed feelings of being genuinely cared for rather than simply managed or controlled. Rosa doesn't pretend we're not sad about Mommy, Emma explained to the social worker. She says it's okay to be sad and she helps us remember the good things about Mommy without getting scared that thinking about her will make the sadness too big. Ethan's contribution was equally revealing. Before Rosa came, grown-ups would say they understood us, but they didn't really. Rosa says she doesn't understand everything about us, but she wants to learn, and she asks us to help her figure out what we need. The honesty and emotional intelligence in the children's responses clearly impressed Janet Morrison. These were not the words of children who were being threatened or manipulated by an inappropriate caregiver. Instead, they demonstrated the kind of emotional awareness and security that indicated healthy relationships and effective guidance. After completing her interviews and observing the household dynamics, Janet Morrison met privately with Marcus to share her conclusions. Her assessment would determine whether Rosa could continue working with the family or whether more drastic interventions would be necessary. Mr. Wellington, I want to be clear about something, she began. Your children have been through significant trauma, and their behavioral problems were serious enough to warrant professional concern. However, what I've observed today suggests that they are in a stable, nurturing environment with appropriate supervision and boundaries. Marcus felt relief flood through him, but Janet Morrison wasn't finished. Ms. Martinez's methods are unconventional, and I understand why they might concern traditionally trained professionals. However, her approach is producing measurable results in terms of the children's emotional stability and behavioral improvement. Most importantly, your children feel safe and cared for, which is the primary goal of any childcare arrangement. The social worker's official report would note that while Rosa's methods deviated from standard practices, they were effective and appropriate for the specific needs of the Wellington family. Dr. Hawthorne's concerns were acknowledged but deemed insufficient to warrant removing Rosa from her position or requiring additional supervision. However, the investigation had attracted attention that Marcus had hoped to avoid. Word of the social services visit began circulating through Beverly Hills society, accompanied by speculation about the Wellington family's private struggles and the unconventional woman who had somehow tamed their notorious children. Diana Wellington was among the first to call with her concerns about the family's reputation. Marcus, people are talking. The story is getting distorted, and it's not reflecting well on any of us. Maybe it's time to consider a more traditional arrangement, someone whose methods won't raise eyebrows or questions. But as Marcus listened to his sister's worries about social perception, he found himself thinking about Emma's painting and Ethan's explanation of why they trusted Rosa. His children were healing, laughing, and learning to love again. They had found in Rosa Martinez something that all the credentialed professionals and socially acceptable caregivers had failed to provide: genuine understanding and unconditional acceptance paired with clear boundaries and authentic relationship. The battle for his family's future was far from over, but Marcus was beginning to understand that the most important victories wouldn't be won in courtrooms or professional consultations. They would be won in quiet moments of connection, in small acts of trust, and in the gradual reconstruction of his children's faith that the adults in their lives could be counted on to stay, to care, and to fight for them when necessary. Rosa Martinez had done more than survive the Wellington twins' attempts to drive her away. She had helped them discover that relationships could be safe, that boundaries could be loving, and that healing was possible even after the most devastating losses. Now Marcus would have to decide whether he was brave enough to defend what she had built, regardless of what the outside world might think of their unconventional family dynamic. The crisis that would determine Rosa Martinez's fate at the Wellington estate began with a single photograph and a calculated betrayal that no one saw coming. Diana Wellington had been quietly building her case against Rosa for weeks, convinced that her brother's judgment had been compromised by desperation and his children's apparent improvement. Diana believed that Marcus was being manipulated by a clever woman who had found a way to exploit his guilt and his children's vulnerability for her own benefit. Diana's opportunity came during the annual Wellington Family Charity Gala, an elaborate fundraising event that Marcus hosted each year to honor Victoria's memory. The gala was a cornerstone of Beverly Hills' social calendar, drawing celebrities, politicians, and business leaders who contributed millions of dollars to children's cancer research. This year's event was particularly significant because it marked the first time since Victoria's death that Marcus felt confident enough in his family's stability to host the gathering. Rosa had been hesitant about attending the gala, understanding that her presence would likely attract unwanted attention from people who knew nothing about her relationship with the children but would have strong opinions about a housekeeper mixing with high society. However, Emma and Ethan had specifically requested that she attend, wanting to show her the tribute video they had helped create to honor their mother's artistic legacy. The evening began beautifully, with Rosa wearing a simple but elegant black dress that Mrs. Chin had helped her select. She stayed close to the children, helping them navigate conversations with unfamiliar adults while maintaining the quiet dignity that had become her trademark. Emma and Ethan were on their best behavior, excited to be part of an event that celebrated their mother's memory while demonstrating to the assembled guests that they were no longer the uncontrollable children who had become Beverly Hills legend. Marcus watched his family with pride and amazement. 6 months ago, the idea of bringing Emma and Ethan to a public event would have been unthinkable. Now they moved through the crowd with confidence and grace, Emma explaining her mother's paintings to interested guests while Ethan demonstrated the engineering principles behind the gala's elaborate decorative displays. Rosa remained in the background, available when needed but never intrusive, allowing the children to shine while providing the security of her presence. The trouble began when Dr. Hawthorne arrived with a photographer from one of Beverly Hills Society magazines, ostensibly to document the charitable work being done in Victoria's honor. What Marcus didn't realize was that Diana had orchestrated this coverage as part of a larger plan to expose what she viewed as the inappropriate relationship between Rosa and the Wellington family. Dr. Hawthorne had spent the weeks since the social services investigation documenting what she characterized as concerning behaviors in the children that she attributed to Rosa's influence. She had compiled reports suggesting that Emma and Ethan's apparent stability was actually evidence of psychological suppression, that Rosa's boundary-setting techniques were creating anxiety that the children were learning to hide rather than address. The photograph that would later become the center of controversy was taken during a quiet moment when Emma had scraped her knee on the terrace steps. Rosa had immediately knelt beside the child, cleaning the wound and applying a bandage while Emma leaned against her for comfort. To anyone observing, it was a natural scene of an adult caring for an injured child. But through Dr. Hawthorne's lens, it represented something more sinister, an untrained woman providing medical treatment and inappropriate physical comfort to a vulnerable child. The real trap, however, was set in motion by Diana's conversation with Miranda Castellanos' attorney, who had agreed to attend the gala as Diana's guest. Throughout the evening, Diana made sure to introduce the attorney to key figures in Beverly Hills society, subtly sharing her concerns about her brother's household and the woman who had been given unprecedented access to his children. "I'm just worried about Marcus's judgment," Diana confided to Margaret Ashford, the wife of a prominent judge and a woman whose opinions carried significant weight in their social circle. "This Rosa person has no background checks, no credentials, and frankly, I'm not sure what her real motivations are for inserting herself into our family." The seeds of doubt that Diana planted were carefully chosen and strategically distributed. She never made direct accusations, but instead raised questions about Rosa's background, her qualifications, and the appropriateness of her methods. Each conversation was designed to make the listener feel privileged to receive inside information about the Wellington family drama while encouraging them to draw their own negative conclusions. Marcus remained oblivious to his sister's campaign until the moment everything exploded. He was delivering his annual speech thanking the guests for their support when his assistant appeared at his elbow with an urgent message. Miranda Castellanos had arrived with her attorney and was demanding to speak with him immediately about what she claimed were new developments in her potential lawsuit. The confrontation took place in Marcus's home office, away from the guests but witnessed by several household staff members who would later provide conflicting accounts of what transpired. Miranda appeared genuinely distressed, her hands shaking as she explained that seeing Rosa at the gala had triggered what her therapist called a trauma response. "That woman shouldn't be around children," Miranda said, her voice rising with emotion. "The fact that you brought her to a public event, that you're presenting her as part of your family, shows that you don't understand how dangerous she is." Miranda's attorney was more calculated in his approach, presenting what he claimed was evidence of Rosa's inappropriate conduct. The evidence consisted primarily of Dr. Hawthorne's psychological assessments, statements from concerned society members about Rosa's behavior at the gala, and the photograph of Rosa treating Emma's scraped knee, which he characterized as an unlicensed person practicing medicine on a minor. "Mr. Wellington," the attorney said, spreading documents across Marcus's desk, "we have multiple professional opinions suggesting that Ms. Martinez's methods constitute emotional abuse disguised as discipline. The children may appear compliant now, but psychological suppression often manifests as superficial behavioral improvement while causing long-term developmental damage." Marcus felt the room spinning as he tried to process the accusations being leveled against the woman who had transformed his children's lives. The timing was devastating in the middle of an event celebrating his wife's memory, with hundreds of guests downstairs. He was being presented with evidence that his judgment had been catastrophically flawed. The attorney continued his presentation, explaining that Miranda was prepared to file a formal complaint with Child Protective Services alleging that Rosa's continued employment endangered Emma and Ethan's welfare. The complaint would include testimonies from Dr. Hawthorne, statements from concerned family members, and documentation of what they characterized as Rosa's history of threatening violence against children in her care. "We're not trying to cause trouble for your family," the attorney said with practiced sympathy. "But we have an ethical obligation to ensure that other children aren't subjected to the same treatment that traumatized my client." Marcus looked at the assembled evidence with growing horror, seeing his family's stability crumbling before his eyes. The documents painted Rosa as a manipulative predator who had exploited his desperation to gain access to his vulnerable children. Every positive change he had witnessed was reframed as evidence of psychological manipulation, every boundary she had set recast as emotional abuse. Meanwhile, downstairs at the gala, Rosa was experiencing her own crisis. Diana had cornered her near the children's tribute display, ostensibly to have a friendly conversation about Emma and Ethan's progress. But Diana's true purpose was to provoke Rosa into the kind of confrontation that would support the narrative being constructed upstairs. "You know, Rosa, I have to admire your strategy," Diana said with a smile that never reached her eyes. "Getting close to two traumatized children, making yourself indispensable to a grieving widower, positioning yourself as the family's savior. It's quite clever." Rosa felt her stomach clench with the recognition that she was being deliberately provoked, but she maintained her calm demeanor. "I'm not sure what you're implying, Ms. Wellington." "I'm not implying anything," Diana replied. "I'm stating directly that I think you're a predator who has taken advantage of my brother's desperation and his children's vulnerability. You've convinced them they need you, but what you've really done is made them dependent on someone who has no business being in their lives." The accusation hit Rosa like a physical blow, not because it was true, but because it struck at her deepest fears about her relationship with Emma and Ethan. She had always been aware that her background and methods made her vulnerable to exactly this kind of attack, and she had worried about whether her influence on the children was genuinely beneficial or simply different from the dysfunction they had known before. "Those children were destroying themselves and everyone around them when I arrived," Rosa said quietly. "Now they're healing, learning, and building healthy relationships. If you want to characterize that as predatory behavior, that says more about your values than mine." Diana's smile became predatory. "Healthy relationships don't involve adults threatening to hurt children. Healing doesn't require isolation from qualified professionals who might question your methods. And learning doesn't happen when children are too afraid of consequences to express their genuine feelings." Before Rosa could respond, Emma appeared at her side, having escaped from a conversation with one of the gala guests. The little girl immediately sensed the tension between the two adults and moved protectively closer to Rosa. "Aunt Diana, what are you talking about?" Emma asked with the directness that Rosa had encouraged in both children. "Rosa doesn't make us afraid. She makes us feel safe." Diana's expression softened as she knelt to Emma's eye level, her voice becoming gentle and concerned. "Sweetheart, sometimes adults who seem nice on the outside are actually trying to control us in ways that aren't healthy. Has Rosa ever told you that bad things would happen if you didn't do what she wanted?" Emma's face scrunched with confusion. "She tells us what will happen if we make certain choices, but that's so we can decide what we want to do. That's not the same as threatening us." "But Emma," Diana pressed gently, "don't you think it was wrong of her to say she would hurt you if you hurt her? Doesn't that make you worried about making her angry?" The question was designed to plant doubt in Emma's mind about her relationship with Rosa, but it had the opposite effect. Emma's expression cleared as she realized what her aunt was trying to do. "Aunt Diana, you don't understand how it was before Rosa came," Emma said with the patience of a child explaining something obvious to a confused adult. "We hurt people because we thought they would leave anyway, so we wanted them to leave before we cared about them. Rosa was the first person who said she wouldn't leave just because we were difficult, but she also wouldn't stay if we were genuinely dangerous. That made us feel safe because we knew she was telling the truth." Diana's carefully constructed argument crumbled in the face of Emma's clear-eyed explanation of her emotional experience. The child wasn't describing fear or manipulation, but rather the relief of finally encountering an adult who communicated honestly about relationships and boundaries. Upstairs, Marcus was reaching his own moment of clarity. As he listened to the attorney's presentation and reviewed the assembled evidence against Rosa, he began to notice the gaps and inconsistencies in their case. Dr. Hawthorne's psychological assessments were based on theoretical concerns rather than observed problems. Miranda's trauma responses were documented but seemed disproportionate to her actual experiences with Emma and Ethan. Most tellingly, none of the accusations addressed the undeniable fact that his children were thriving in ways that years of traditional treatment had failed to achieve. The turning point came when Marcus asked the simple question, "If Ms. Martinez's methods are so harmful, why are my children happier, more emotionally stable, and more socially functional than they've been since their mother died?" The attorney's response was telling, "Mr. Wellington, children who are being psychologically manipulated often appear to be doing well on the surface. The damage doesn't become apparent until later, sometimes years later." Marcus realized that this argument could be used to justify removing any caregiver who achieved positive results with difficult children. If success was evidence of manipulation, and problems were evidence of inadequacy, then no approach could ever be validated or defended. "I want to see your evidence that Ms. Martinez has actually harmed my children," Marcus said firmly. "Not theoretical concerns about her methods, not professional opinions about what might happen in the future, but actual documented harm that she has caused Emma and Ethan." The silence that followed his demand was profound. Neither Miranda, her attorney, nor Dr. Hawthorne could point to any specific instance where Rosa's actions had negatively affected the children's well-being, behavior, or emotional development. Their entire case was built on speculation and professional disapproval rather than observed outcomes. As this realization settled over Marcus, his phone buzzed with a text message from Mrs. Chen. "Mr. Wellington, you need to come downstairs immediately. There's a situation with Ms. Rosa and your sister." Marcus excused himself from the meeting and hurried downstairs to find a crowd of guests watching as Diana continued her confrontation with Rosa, now with both Emma and Ethan flanking their caregiver like protective bodyguards. Ethan was speaking with the kind of passionate intensity that Marcus had rarely seen from his typically reserved son. "Aunt Diana, you're wrong about Rosa," Ethan was saying, his small hands clenched into fists at his sides. "She's not mean to us. She's the first grown-up who treated us like we were smart enough to understand things. She doesn't lie to make us feel better, and she doesn't pretend that everything is okay when it's not." Emma nodded emphatically. "And she doesn't leave when things get difficult. Everyone else left, but Rosa stays and helps us figure out how to do better. That's what families do." The last sentence hit Marcus like lightning. His children weren't just defending Rosa as their caregiver, they were defending her as family, as someone who had earned a permanent place in their emotional lives through consistency, honesty, and genuine care. Diana realized that her public confrontation had backfired spectacularly. Instead of exposing Rosa as inappropriate or manipulative, she had created a scene where two articulate children were passionately defending an adult who had clearly earned their trust and affection through positive relationship rather than fear or dependency. Marcus stepped forward, his voice carrying clearly across the gathered crowd. "Diana, I think it's time for you to leave." His sister's face flushed with anger and embarrassment. "Marcus, you're making a terrible mistake. You're choosing a stranger over your own family's concerns." "I'm choosing my children's well-being over your personal opinions," Marcus replied calmly. "Emma and Ethan are thriving. They're happy, healthy, and learning to trust again. I'm not going to destroy that progress because you disapprove of Rosa's background or methods." The confrontation might have escalated further, but Rosa stepped forward with the quiet authority that had become her signature. "Ms. Wellington, I understand your concerns about my relationship with Emma and Ethan. If you'd like to discuss your specific worries about my methods or my qualifications, I'm happy to have that conversation privately. But I won't continue this discussion in front of the children or your brother's guests." The offer was reasonable and professional, which only highlighted the contrast between Rosa's dignified response and Diana's aggressive accusations. Several guests murmured their approval of Rosa's handling of the situation, clearly impressed by her composure under pressure. Diana realized she had lost both the argument and the audience. Her attempt to publicly humiliate Rosa had instead demonstrated exactly why the Wellington children had bonded with this woman. She remained calm under pressure, prioritized their well-being over her own ego, and handled conflict with grace and maturity. "This isn't over," Diana said quietly to Marcus before gathering her purse and heading for the exit. But in many ways, it was over. The public confrontation had forced Marcus to choose between the woman who had healed his family and the people who disapproved of her methods, and his choice had been clear and decisive. More importantly, it had revealed the depth of Emma and Ethan's attachment to Rosa and their sophisticated understanding of why her approach had succeeded where others had failed. The remaining hours of the gala passed peacefully, with many guests approaching Marcus to express their admiration for Rosa's handling of the difficult situation and their obvious affection for his children. Several prominent families mentioned their own struggles with children's behavioral issues and asked for Rosa's contact information, clearly impressed by the results she had achieved with the notorious Wellington twins. Later that evening, after the last guests had departed and the children were in bed, Marcus found Rosa sitting in Victoria's former art studio, looking through the paintings they had been using in their nightly memory sessions. She appeared calm but tired, processing the emotional intensity of the evening's events. "I owe you an apology," Marcus said, settling into the chair beside her. "I should have protected you from Diana's attack. I should have seen it coming." Rosa shook her head. You were dealing with your own crisis upstairs. Mrs. Chen told me about Miranda and her attorney. What did you decide? Marcus explained how the evening's events had crystallized his understanding of what really mattered, his children's happiness and well-being. He had dismissed Miranda's attorney, terminated his professional relationship with Dr. Hawthorne, and made it clear to Diana that her interference in his family's affairs was no longer welcome. But what about the social pressure? Rosa asked. The professional concerns? The questions about my qualifications? Marcus looked around the art studio, remembering how Victoria had always trusted her instincts about people over conventional wisdom or social expectations. My wife would have loved you, he said quietly. She would have seen immediately what took me months to understand, that love and healing don't always come in the packages that society expects or professionals recommend. He pulled out a document he had been preparing for weeks, a formal employment contract that offered Rosa not just job security, but legal protection and recognition as an essential member of the Wellington household. The terms included health insurance, retirement benefits, and a salary that reflected her true value to the family rather than the market rate for domestic workers. I'm not just asking you to stay, Rosa. I'm asking you to let us make this official, to give you the security and recognition you deserve for everything you've done for Emma and Ethan. Rosa studied the contract carefully, understanding that accepting it would represent a fundamental change in her relationship with the Wellington family. She would no longer be just a temporary solution to a crisis, but a permanent member of their household with legal rights and professional standing. There's something I need to tell you first, she said, her voice carrying a gravity that made Marcus sit straighter. My real reason for taking this job wasn't just about the money or even about helping your children, though both of those things mattered to me. She paused, gathering her thoughts before continuing. I lost my own daughter in a car accident 3 years ago. She was 5 years old, beautiful and brilliant and full of life. After she died, I couldn't find any meaning in anything I did. Every job felt pointless, every day felt empty. Marcus felt his breath catch, understanding suddenly why Rosa had connected so deeply with his grieving children. When I met Emma and Ethan, I saw children who were lost in the same darkness that had swallowed me. Helping them heal has been helping me heal too. They gave me a reason to care again, a purpose that felt worthy of the love I had for my daughter. The revelation recontextualized everything Rosa had done for the Wellington family. Her patience with the children's anger, her understanding of their grief, her refusal to give up on them even in their darkest moments, all of it came from her own experience of loss and her determination to prevent other children from being destroyed by trauma. Does this change your decision about the contract? Rosa asked. Marcus signed the document without hesitation. It makes me even more certain that you belong here. Victoria always said that the people who can help us heal are usually the ones who have walked through similar darkness themselves. As Rosa signed her own name to the contract, sealing her commitment to the Wellington family's future, both adults understood that they were creating something unprecedented, a family structure built not on traditional roles or social expectations, but on mutual need, genuine care, and shared commitment to helping each other heal from devastating losses. Upstairs, Emma and Ethan slept peacefully in their beds, secure in the knowledge that the adult who had taught them to trust again would be there when they woke up, and the day after that, and for as many days as they needed her. The Wellington family had found its way back to wholeness, not by replacing what they had lost, but by creating something entirely new from the broken pieces of their former lives. The story of the billionaire's twins who bit every babysitter until they met the maid who bit them back had become something far more profound, a testament to the power of honest boundaries, authentic relationships, and the courage to defend the people who help us become our best selves, regardless of what the outside world might think. Marcus Wellington had learned that true wealth wasn't measured in stock prices or social status, but in the laughter of children who felt safe enough to trust again, the peace of a home where love was expressed through consistency rather than grand gestures, and the presence of someone brave enough to fight for his family when their unconventional healing methods came under attack. Rosa Martinez had discovered that the greatest gift she could give wasn't just her professional skills or her natural empathy, but her willingness to let broken children help heal her own broken heart while she helped mend theirs. In saving the Wellington twins from their destructive spiral, she had saved herself from the meaningless existence that grief had created in her own life. Together, they had created proof that families aren't always formed by blood or law, but sometimes by choice, commitment, and the shared determination to build something beautiful from the wreckage of loss. The Wellington estate was no longer a fortress protecting its inhabitants from the world's judgment, but a home where healing happened daily, where boundaries created safety instead of distance, and where love was measured not by perfection, but by persistence. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.